Hi, welcome back to another episode of From Dropout to JD. Today's guest, his name is Elliot, and welcome Elliot to the show. Hi.
Hi, thank you so much.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, my name is Elliot. I use they, them, or she, her pronouns. I'm originally from downstate Illinois, but I currently live in Ohio.
That's cool. That's really awesome. Do you like living in Ohio?
It's pretty cool. Ohio gets a lot of hate that it doesn't deserve. I have become a little bit of an Ohio evangelist. Um, but yeah, I mean, like, I understand that it's easy to punch up, it's easy to meme on the best state. So
That's funny because I'm from Texas and Texas pride is just like so intense.
yeah,
So
y'all get it.
yeah, so I feel you. So let's kind of get into it. So what's your relationship to being a dropout?
Yeah, I think I would describe myself as a dropout-ish.
Hmm.
Um, I so I transferred into a selective admissions high school my freshman year.
Okay.
I came from a public school background in a rural area where the overall income of the town was very low. And so transferring into this high school was a major culture shock for me. The students on average were a lot wealthier. A lot more of my peers had parents in professional positions than at my previous school. And I was also exposed to a wider range of beliefs, basically across the political and religious spectrum, than in my very small hometown. So that culture shock for me sort of made me reevaluate where I was in my own beliefs. It also was the first time that I realized that my family was not wealthy.
Okay.
I very much thought that we were, but we were definitely not. And So that culture shock sort of contributed to going from a straight A student my first semester of high school
Okay.
to my grades slowly slipping. My home life, because of my changed opinions about certain things and because of my decreased performance at school, was very tense, increasingly tense. My sophomore year, I started cutting class just a lot, all the time. And halfway through my junior year of high school, it was the second day of second semester of junior year, I just decided to not go to school. And then I continued to not go to school. I withdrew from that school and I did immediately enroll in an online high school, but that was mostly to appease my mom. I had basically no intention of actually finishing. I didn't see the point. I hated school. I thought that it was the worst thing that ever happened to me. And it was just like, why would I do this at all? So for about 8 months, I basically didn't do any schoolwork at all. Sometimes if I got bored enough, I would like log on and like do a singular lesson, which is like not how one finishes high school.
Right.
um, but it was like mostly working odd jobs. I was couch surfing a lot because home was pretty tense.
Okay.
And I moved out for the first time. I think I was 17, somewhere around there.
Hmm.
And was in and out, and I moved out permanently at 18. Um, it is very difficult to get and then also to keep a job when you don't have a high school diploma.
Okay.
So after about 8 months of floundering, I realized that I was making my life a lot harder than it needed to be by not finishing the diploma. So I sort of speed ran a year and a half of high school online through um, it's a diploma program that's usually for non-traditional diploma seekers who don't want to take the GED and would rather just get a high school diploma. So it's mostly adult learners.
Okay.
Um, and I actually ended up graduating 2 months before I was technically supposed to graduate.
Oh wow.
And then I um, started at community college right after.
Okay, that's super interesting. When you were talking, it kind of made me wonder how your background influenced your decision to go to law school. Like, was there any connection to your past?
I think in my personal background, um, no, the thing that made me want to go to law school, I worked multiple jobs at once all the way through school
Mm,
to be able to fund being alive, which we all know is very expensive.
yeah.
And one of the most impactful jobs that I had, I worked for the public library
Oh, I love
in an inner city neighborhood, and it was really informative to me to see the ways that the lack of access to technology and the lack of access to education impacted people's day-to-day lives. It reminded me a lot of the ways that rural communities, like the ones that I grew up in, are also impacted by things like the digital divide and under-resourced schools. Um, and so seeing that made me want to continue to work in spaces where people are being advocated for and provided resources. Um, I do think that maybe having grown up in an under-resourced community myself, and having had less access to certain opportunities than my classmates when I transferred schools, I do think that that informed my perspective when I was doing that work. Um, yeah.
Okay, wow. I like what you said about the digital divide. I feel like that isn't discussed as much as it probably should be in terms of the disadvantaged versus the advantaged. Um, yeah.
Yeah, I have this memory, um, when I transferred out of community college to university.
Mhm.
I was in a literature class called Literature, Science, and Technology,
Okay.
which is about exactly what it would sound like. And we were all sitting in our big discussion circle in the class, and um, one of the classmates said that everyone has a smartphone now and everyone has internet access now. And at the time, I was working in this library where absolutely not, like like not everyone had a smartphone, not everyone had internet at home, not everyone had a computer at home. And I also come from a community where that wasn't true.
Okay.
Um, so like I just remember being shocked, like sitting in this university, knowing that not 2 miles from campus, there's an entire neighborhood where that access is not nearly as equitable as one might think
Right.
it would be in the 21st century.
Right. So with all that, I guess, in mind, when you were preparing for law school, did you find yourself facing financial obstacles during the process?
Yeah. Um, yeah. There were a lot of points, even just during my college career, where if a miracle hadn't happened, I would have had to leave school again.
Right.
Um, I'm like, so in when I was at community college, my first year I had a job, where at that one job I was working 40 to 50 hours a week,
Mhm.
um,
Oh, wow.
while also having to sort of adapt to the reality of school. Having not actually participated in
Mhm.
high school, I did not have anything resembling study skills. Did not know how any of that worked, and I also didn't know how to balance a massive workload professionally with a massive academic workload, which is a balance that I figured out. But that first year was a little rough around the edges. Um, when I transferred to a university, um, my my first semester, I had a very expensive health issue pop up, and I
Mhm.
didn't have real health insurance because I couldn't afford the university insurance. I just had a health, I think it's called like a health sharing. I forget what it's actually called, but it's basically just like it's a plan that's good at this one clinic, which happened to be in my home state, which is not here. uh, and so like I had no coverage. And that same week, my car, which is 20 years old,
Wow.
needed over $1,000 of repair. And I was just kind of in a position where I was basically going to have to like empty my bank account, max out my credit card, and probably take a semester or two off of school to like recoup.
Yeah.
But um, it's amazing what asking for help can do.
Yeah.
I just remember showing up to school, and going to my academic advisor's office, and I just kind of like broke down and cried. I felt like having gotten to university was a very big deal for me, and to feel like it was going to be taken away from me, um, it was really a lot. And she helped me apply for an emergency grant. So that way, my rent for that month ended up being covered. So I could use that money to put it towards my other expenses. And a friend of mine actually reached out to his parents, and his parents helped me cover my medical expenses. And
Wow.
they actually paid for my health insurance the rest of the way through school.
Wow, that's so generous.
It is very generous. And like my community, um, the, the community that's built by asking for help, I guess. They're a lot of the reason why I made it to graduation.
Wow, that's a lot. I'm glad it worked out because that is a very scary position to be in. And it actually kind of reminds me of like my journey a little bit because I left home when I was like 20 and I didn't have a lot of money, and I had friends who helped pay to get me back to where I was living at the time, which is New Jersey. And then I also reached out to my academic advisor, and they had this emergency fund for people like me, and I was able to get $1,000 to like start paying for rent. So
Yes.
that's interesting that our stories are kind of similar.
Yeah. I think I definitely grew up in a culture where asking for help was sort of frowned upon, and
Okay.
being self-sufficient and being autonomous, is what is valued. So to have been struggling so much that I felt like I had to ask for help, um, was at the time very like it felt shameful to me. But the further along in my college career that I got, and the deeper into adult life that I got, the more I started to understand that without community, without support systems, like you just can't be resilient like that.
Right.
Resilience and community go hand in hand.
Yeah. And I feel like also growing up, like the younger you are, the more support you need. And I feel like as you grow older, you rely less on people because you have more for yourself. Like the money I was making at 19 is way different than the money I'm making now at 24. Like I used to work 3 jobs, work, like you said, 60 hours a week. And now my job that I work 40 hours and I make way more than I did at that point. So I guess if anyone's listening to this and they're in that situation before they've gotten help, just give it time, stay persistent, and reach out because you never know who's going to be able to help you get through that tough situation.
Yeah, the 8.25 an hour days were not
Oh God,
were not
Jesus
ideal.
Christ. It's actually, it feels criminal to me that like in Texas, it's like 7:33 or something. Like that's just, it's like, you might as well just spit in our faces. Like that just seems so ridiculous that they would pay us such low wages to do some of the most grueling, like demanding work on your body type of jobs. It gets me very heated.
Yeah, it is that there are a lot of jobs that are wildly undervalued for how much everyone relies on them.
Yeah. So I guess this kind of leads me into another question I had, which is, well, first of all, I guess before I jump ahead, maybe we should tell the viewers or the listeners about where you've come since then, because you kind of made it to a very nice, prestigious location. I don't want to give it away, but it's a cool
Yeah,
story.
yes. So I'll be attending Yale Law School this fall. I'm ecstatic to put it gently. I didn't expect this outcome in my application cycle. I had a very, very fortunate application cycle. Um, but yeah, it's possible.
Yeah. Oh my God. So like, did they, so did you have good grades in college? Because I know it was different in high school.
Yeah, I did.
Okay.
I turned it around. So college took me 11 semesters. One of those was a summer semester. So I did take longer than, is like the traditional path. And
Mhm.
I think that it's really important for people to evaluate their situations and to not be in such a hurry if it's
Right.
possible. Um, for me, my first couple of semesters, my degree is in neuroscience. So I took a lot of STEM classes, which are an agonizing workload, especially those like basic, like your gen chems, your gen bios, your calculus. They're just a substantial workload, and I had no concept of how much work outside of the classroom those classes would take when I
Right.
started college. So my first year, that's I ended up with some B's on my transcript, not bad. But the only reason that there's not worse on my transcript is because there are some W's. I withdrew from classes that I was
Oh,
doing very poorly in. And I really encourage people, especially especially if you're early in your college career and still trying to feel it out. Taking a W when you can. It's for me, it was really necessary, and it also saved my GPA.
right.
um, I think in my first year, um, I had 3 W's that year.
Okay.
I think I can't remember off the top of my head. But actually, the class that taught me how to do school was calculus.
Oh,
Um, I treated calculus like it was one of my jobs. I basically ate, slept, and breathed calculus. Um, it was, I would show up early to school, sit down at the table, study calculus, go to class. I was very fortunate that I worked at my um, community college's library,
okay.
and in that position, if there's not work to be done at the library and there's no one, approaching the desk, you're allowed to study at the desk.
Oh,
um, which I really encourage people to look into on-campus jobs for that reason, is they tend to be a lot more flexible about what you can do on the job than other traditional jobs. So that's also one of the reasons why, instead of working one full-time job through school, I usually worked multiple part-time jobs, and one of them was
okay.
usually something on campus that was a little more flexible, so that way I could study while I was there. Um, yeah, that job taught me how to have academic discipline. And after that, the lowest grade I got was an A-.
Oh,
So I
nice.
ended up, I graduated from community college with honors. I think I had around a 3.8 thanks to those W's, because those grades would have been ugly. And then I graduated summa cum laude with my bachelor's degree. Um, but while doing my bachelor's degree, there were some semesters where I only took 9 graded credit hours. And then
Okay.
I would usually do like 3 credits of like research, or something like that, to be able to bring myself up to full-time status so I could get my financial aid. Just because like with how much I was working, and also, like I wanted to be able to sleep at
Right.
night sometimes. I knew that I couldn't handle like the the 15-hour course loads that a lot of my peers were taking on, while also still being able to maintain my grades.
Right, right. So this drive you had that kind of got you through school in a very strategic and smart manner, I might add. Was it for law school, or is this just like a personal goal you had?
It's kind of twofold. One of it, so I originally thought that I wanted to be an academic in neuroscience.
Okay.
I've been working in neuroscience research since 2017, and that's what I currently do now. And I can assure you that I absolutely do not want to work in neuroscience research forever. It is not for me. But for graduate program applications, they do prefer to see grades on the higher end. So
Mm,
like that was part of the motivation, but this is like maybe a little petty, but honestly, like my main driver was like spite half the time. I felt crushed after leaving high school. I felt like a massive failure, especially
mm,
having transferred into this school where everyone ends up on a big scholarship at like a very nice state school or at an Ivy League school or Stanford or wherever.
mm.
It was sort of devastating to see all of my classmates going on to these like massive, very impressive opportunities, while I had had I just felt like a failure.
Yeah,
And so I sort of felt like I had something to prove.
right.
Um, and I hate that that was so motivating to me, but like it was more, I needed to prove to myself that I could do it
Right.
and that I could still be academically successful despite having uh kind of crashed and burned just a little bit.
I feel that's so hard, honestly, and it's something that I'm at war with right now because there is like a petty part of me that I do have to admit, where I'm like, okay, like the way I left school was incredibly humbling, is how I'll put it. Um, and it also kind of makes me wonder. So I guess my dilemma is like, should I'm torn between going to the best school I can go to and or going to law school for free because I feel like both are impressive, but I'm kind of leaning towards going to a not as notable school on a full ride, hopefully. But no one would know that. So I'm kind of like, will that like how do I satisfy this part of me that is kind of still bitter about how I left school?
Yeah, it's like that's such a personal question. I did have some opportunities to attend school on a full ride scholarship,
Oh wow.
and I did turn those down. Um, and yeah, I mean, like part of it is still this fight thing. Like, we made it here, so we're gonna keep it. Part of it is also though, I did get a significant amount of need-based financial aid.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
so I think it's Yale, Stanford, and Harvard are the three schools that are purely need-based aid schools. Sorry,
Right.
my cat is getting into something. Stop
Mm,
that. They're purely need-based aid. So there aren't merit scholarships. Any merit scholarships you get to attend those schools are going to be external.
mm,
So upon evaluating my financial circumstances, I was able to get enough scholarship from Yale that I felt okay
okay.
taking on that debt burden. Also, I mean, just looking at the employment outcomes, I felt confident
Right.
that if I um, felt the need to and wanted to um, take my career in a direction where I'm making a substantial amount of money to pay that off, I can. Also, at these schools where you're taking on a pretty substantial debt burden, many of them have um, programs where if you make a low income right out of school,
Mm,
or if you're working in some kind of public service or government role, you're able to apply for programs where the school will help you cover your the cost of your student loans.
right.
Um, at Yale, the program is COAP. I think it might be called, I think they might pronounce it COPE. Um, but it's just, if you're working in a position where you're not making as much money as your big law classmates, then like they will evaluate your financial situation and sort of help you out. So that way you can have the professional flexibility that you might want to have to be able to go into these lower paying but necessary jobs.
Right.
So that's also something to consider when you're looking through your options is, are there programs to help me if I want to go into public service? What does the need-based aid at need-based aid schools look like?
Mm-hmm.
There's also the cost of living issue is definitely something to think about. Some places just cost a whole lot more to live
Right.
than others, which is, I'm currently experiencing New England sticker shock. It's like, just having grown up in the Midwest, I've lived in Illinois, Indiana, or Ohio for my whole life.
Okay.
So looking at the rent prices here versus the rent prices in New England is a little bit like, is this normal? Is this okay? Apparently it is normal. Still not okay. Like, nobody thinks it's okay.
Yeah. Jesus. So why, I guess, did why did you want to become a lawyer? Like, you were on this neuroscience path, and I guess you didn't want to become an academic, but where did law school fit in?
Yeah. It's kind of, I didn't think that like going from STEM to like something more in the public sector, public service, or just otherwise, not research based.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't think that was a thing until I was sitting in a cognitive neuroscience class my first semester at university, and the professor, who actually ended up being my thesis advisor and one of my recommenders for law school.
Oh, wow.
He mentioned that one of his previous students was doing a master's degree in like science and public policy, something to that effect.
Okay.
I think it's the program at Duke. And like my ears kind of perked up. It's like, wait, what is that? So I looked it up, and I stumbled across this whole like field that's being born called neurolaw, which is about
Oh.
the intersection of law and neuroscience, and became immediately obsessed, as one does. I ended up starting a student organization called the Neurolaw Group,
Oh,
and
wow.
it was basically a journal club, but we had some speakers who worked or studied at the intersection of law and neuroscience come in.
Wow.
Um, I then sort of changed gears to like wanting to do a JD PhD, which yeah, obviously we're not doing that. But yeah, it basically changed the, like that one comment that he made changed the entire course of my academic career from there on out. I became really interested academically in the ways that science and technology interact with law and just how we live our daily lives.
Mm.
So I ended up taking classes like science, technology, and public policy out of the public affairs class.
Okay.
I ended up dropping my computer science minor and took a minor in the history of science and technology instead.
Oh.
And really sort of rerouted my whole life to focus on like not just the stuff of science,
Mm-hmm.
but the stuff about science. So over the top of it. It's just like science and technology don't exist in this vacuum. There's nothing pure about it. As people, we make technology and we do the science, we create the science, and we also decide how the things that we learn in research and the tools that we make are implemented in the world around us. And I'm really excited about that step in the middle, where we go from the lab, where we go from development, the transition from those environments out into the world. I want to be right in the middle of that. And for me, it just seemed like law was the best way to do that. I think it also feeds into some natural skills and interests that I have.
Okay.
I'm very wordy, if you absolutely could not tell. And the pandemic really highlighted for me that I am an extrovert. I'm very much a people person, and I want to work with people.
Mm,
Um, and I like to play with ideas and do research and see how everything connects to feed into a singular idea. I love having a goal to work towards, which I think, law is a very goal-oriented profession.
right.
Um, so I think, yeah, did that answer the question?
No, that definitely did. And you're super passionate about that intersection that you were mentioning, which is so cool to see because I think my favorite part of this project that I'm doing with the podcast is talking to people and seeing how they overcame adversity. And the common denominator I've been seeing is like sheer passion. Like there's something that's pulling them over all their challenges that they have to get past to get to law school. So that's cool
Yeah.
that you have that.
Yeah, I do think, hindsight, the hindsight is 2020 saying, I think it's true. As I was going through, it wasn't always clear to me that, like, oh yeah, like this is my passion, like I'm doing this because I'm in love with it. And honestly, like most of the time while I was in school, I was so tired that I probably couldn't tell you how I genuinely felt about anything, because my overriding emotion was just like exhausted. If exhausted could be an emotion, which, like, I feel like it can be.
Oh, yeah.
An emotion and a state of being. Um, so it wasn't, honestly, number one, taking years off in between undergrad and law school was the best decision I could have possibly made at the time. I made it sort of unwillingly. I didn't want to, but I hit the end of undergrad and I hit a wall. I was like experiencing this, like, do I want a PhD sort of existential crisis, which, thinking of it as an existential crisis now is very funny.
That's
But
funny.
I hit that senioritis. Like, I've got 3 brain cells that I'm working with right now, and like everything felt like a crisis.
Okay.
um, and yeah, so taking that time off was really important for me, to be able to breathe a little bit and
Yeah.
actually really think about why I'm doing this. So yeah, I think being comfortable working on my own timeline was super important. But um, the the second part of it was the thing that really helped me sort of home in on what interests me was actually the process of writing my law school application materials.
Yeah.
Um, it took me nine months to write my personal statement. I started drafting in January of 2021 and submitted all of my applications in September, like late September to the second week of October. Somewhere in that window is when I submitted my applications. Um, and just like sitting there and thinking through, just like, what are the threads in my life that I can pull out that brought me here, made me realize that, like, oh, I actually do have a pretty consistent set of opportunities that I pursue and things that I'm interested in. And yeah, it was really informative for me as sort of a soul searching process, which, like, I'm not entirely sure that that's what an application process is supposed to be, but like, whatever works.
No, like I definitely feel that there's a major theme of self-discovery when doing the application process because I've been finding myself really challenging myself and trying to, I don't know, I don't know if compartmentalize is the right word, but like trying to put myself on paper is a very raw experience, and a very intimate one that I've come to discover, and it's really hard to do. So like the whole experience of it is very enlightening.
Yeah, I also found that to be true. I think for me, writing my personal statement was very informative for me for figuring out my direction, my why am I going to law school, and why is now the right time for me to be going to law school.
Right.
And writing my diversity statement really helped me put into perspective how, hello cat, this is Smudge. It helped me put into perspective how the ways that I grew up, my experience leaving high school, the realizations that I had have led me to a different kind of understanding of myself, the way that I show up in the world, and how I want to show up in the world going forward. I just the process for me, like, I wouldn't go so far as to say that it was therapeutic, but it was definitely definitely valuable and informative. And I think if you take your time when you're writing your essays, and you do it in sort of iterative and introspective fashion, you end up with a lot of new, or if not new, then at least more refined insights about yourself that will help you remember why you're doing this when things sort of get hard.
Interesting. So how did you approach your Yale 250? And I guess can you explain what that is to the listeners?
Yeah, okay, so the Yale 250 is a 250-word essay on literally anything. The usual sort of advice that you hear is to make some sort of academic or professional argument, but it can be about anything. There's one online that I read that somebody wrote about like having a big head, and how that like defined their experience growing up. You know, it's like very much like it can be about anything. I will say I had to be bullied into applying to Yale. I was not planning to, because like I just didn't think I would get in.
It's freaking Yale. It's the best law school in the world, maybe.
Yeah, so I was just like, I'm not even gonna send this application. But one of my friends was just like, no. So my Yale 250 was my most last minute essay, I think. I wrote it over the course of a week. And I think why I was able to do that was because I had already thought so deeply about, these other two major essays. I had already decided, what parts of my professional and academic life were worth putting onto a resume. And so I ended up talking about a program that I ran at the public library after my second job at the local public libraries here. I ran a digital makerspace. They don't call it a makerspace, but it's pretty much a makerspace at the downtown location of the public library. And one of the key elements of this space is this pedagogy called HOMAGO, which stands for Hang Out, Mess Around, Geek Out. Yeah, it's one of my favorite philosophies of education ever. And basically the point of it is when kids are given the opportunity to interact with each other, to play with technology in creative ways, and to sort of follow their interests into something that they're really passionate about, that they care about, that's when they get to produce their best work. But there is research, I think the last name that I'm looking for is Raffalo, Rafalow, I think might be Lowe. But there's this book I read that goes into several different schools in California that have people of very different socioeconomic status and race. And within those schools, while all of the schools have very similar like technology in terms of the actual devices, the way those technologies are employed in the classrooms is wildly different. At the wealthier, whiter schools, the kids are given sort of free rein to take control of their education and to innovate with technology. While at the more poor Hispanic school that they describe, like the kids are sort of, it's like they're taught the very basics of how to use the technology, and they're surveyed and restricted in what they can do with the technology. They're not given the opportunities to innovate and to really learn in productive ways that will give them the skills for, you know, life in the 21st century. Educational justice is something that I care very much about. And having worked at the intersection of tech and educational justice, for me, making an argument about how technology is employed in schools and is employed in public libraries, it just made sense. Just because that's my educational and professional background. So I made an argument for using educational justice as a space to promote digital human rights.
Okay, that's very interesting. What was your, and this is personally for me, because you did get into Yale and you did have a difficult, I don't know, you had a good college run, I guess, but how did you explain the W's? Did you an addendum or?
I didn't.
You didn't? Oh, wow. Okay.
No, it's like the way I saw it, you know, they had my diversity statement where I told them that I had left school,
Okay.
and sort of, you know, let them know a little bit more about my trajectory. They had my resume that showed how much I was working through school.
Okay.
And, you know, starting at community college, I think that most people understand that there are a lot of reasons why someone would choose to start at community college, ranging from, you know, financial to, you know, working to not sure if college is for me, like in everything in between. I should also know I also took a W my last semester because that class was not going super well for me. It was largely my learning style and the teaching style. They just were not meshing. And also I had terrible senioritis. So also took a W that semester. But I was sort of like, you know, most of my W's were in that first year. My trajectory was made obvious elsewhere. And I was fine with being imperfect without having to explain away my imperfections. I was not asked about what happened in any of my law school interviews.
Oh, wow.
It turns out that a couple of hiccups along the way, like they're expected. Most people, I would say, have, you know, a rough patch at some point where something happens that's out of their control. And, you know, sometimes that shows up on a transcript. I think what I would have addended if, for example, I had withdrawn entirely from a whole semester. That would have been an addendum. If there was a significant gap, so like if I had needed to take a break from school to work a little bit more, I would have written an addendum for that gap in my education. And I also think that if I had not taken W's and had actually received the grades I was on track to receive, I maybe would have written an addendum for that.
Right.
But as it was, I didn't feel the need to explain that I was just a human figuring things out.
Yeah, that's very reassuring, honestly, because I don't know, it's just reassuring. Like, obviously, there are going to be hiccups. Like, that just seems like a huge duh to me. But for you to say that and for it to have worked out, like they saw it and they didn't question it, that makes me feel a lot better about applying with my background.
Yeah.
So
I think if you're straightforward about who you are, and you know, like you're allowed to be human in this process. And you know, all lawyers are human, and I think the best lawyers are humans who remember that they are human.
yeah. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, people who are attorneys are, I don't know, I view them as beasts. Like to be able to do that, and the way people talk about law school absolutely sounds like it's like real life Hunger Game type of situation. So it's, I'm always interested to see what kind of personality future attorneys or attorneys have, because it's always something interesting.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I think like with all professions, there's a range. You know,
Okay.
obviously I'm not there yet. But I do hang out an awful lot with law students and lawyers.
Oh, wow.
I think that once you start on this track, like you find them. Or alternately they find you. I don't know if there's like a special kind of magnetism that comes with like even deeply pondering law school. But it's a little bit like if you build it, they will come sort of thing. You're already doing that by having this podcast and
Yeah,
finding a bunch of law people. Um,
that's true.
but yeah, it just seems like there's a range of personalities. Um, but there's also a range of things that you can do with a law degree. And I think that's something that makes the education and also the profession so special.
Mm. And then I have like, I guess 2 to 3 more questions before we wrap up this episode. I'm curious about the LSAT and your experience with it, especially because you did have financial difficulty during that time period. I'm in my LSAT prep right now, and it's helpful, but I definitely wouldn't understand how I would be able to do well in the LSAT without the prep course. So what was your experience with that?
Yeah. I did not pay very much to prepare for the LSAT, largely because in terms of time and money, I just did not have it. So to prepare for the LSAT, I self-studied entirely.
Yeah.
And I took the test twice.
Okay.
I took in July 2019 on paper
Oh.
and in September 2019 on a tablet. Um, which, obviously very shortly thereafter COVID happened and the
Mm.
flex came into being. So not sure if the tablets will ever return, but I'm one of the few who have taken a tablet LSAT. But yeah, I started studying in January of 2019, thereabout. I think I took my diagnostic um, in December of 2018, and then I studied very lightly through the semester, mostly just if I had a little bit of time in between things, I would do a quick logic game. I really liked logical reasoning. So sometimes I would do a page of that for fun. But I didn't start studying um, with a lot of consistency until probably about May. I studied consistently in May for a few weeks, and then I got married on June 1st of that year. So I was like planning my wedding, and then we went on a little road trip. So I obviously did nothing for those 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And then starting like in mid-June, it was 4 to 6 days a week, probably 35 minutes to an hour and a half a day. My method of studying was very much drill based. I didn't do any of like the textbooks. I didn't use PowerScore. I didn't use the LSAT trainer. For me, I sort of treated the LSAT as if it was a calculus exam.
Mm.
You can read all you want about calculus and still not be able to do it because it's a
Mhm.
skill, and to gain skill knowledge you have to practice the specific skill. um, Something about our brains is that our brains learn best when we force them to do the hard thing, and if we can't figure out the hard thing the first day, sleep on it, try it again the next day, because our learning actually consolidates during sleep and during rest. um, so for me, it was just a matter of like making sure that every day I was touching the problems. For logic games, I was doing a problem, and then like the hardest questions I would come back to and repeat like that same day. If they were extremely hard, I would do it again the next day. And it was just an iterative process of every day putting in a little bit. I took fewer than 10 total timed practice tests because for me, I feel like when you're going to school full time and also working, so much, like you have stamina. So for me, it was mostly just like checking on my progress and making sure that I was actually like making progress. But it was really just a matter of touching the problems almost every day, making sure that every day I was finding like my appropriate edge. So like that point where things felt challenging and I didn't know what was going on and actually had to like sit there and figure it out. And making sure that I was resting enough that my brain could actually like soak in what I was learning.
Wow. Okay. That's really helpful. I I've when I do math courses or when I've done it in the past, I definitely approach it differently than I would say like an English course. So
Yeah.
for you to put it in that perspective really was illuminating, and I'm definitely going to apply that to the way I study.
Yeah, I definitely think like taking more of a STEM studying mindset to the LSAT, like because it is a skills based test,
Hmm.
is definitely a little bit more conducive to learning the test more quickly than a more humanities like content based approach would be.
Right. Okay. And so then my second to last question for you is if you could go back and change any aspect of your academic career, what would it be, if anything, and why?
I joke a lot about how like God, I wish I had majored in engineering because then I would actually be
Hmm.
making money in my gap years type thing. Because academic research does not pay a lot. Shocker, I
Yeah.
know. Uh,
Okay.
but I think actually I don't think I would change a single thing.
Okay.
I think I ended up exactly where I needed to be. Um, uh, some lessons I I definitely learned the hard way, but I think perhaps one of my character flaws or perhaps features is that I learned best the hard way. Um, I think leaving high school was the best worst decision I've ever made.
Okay.
Um, Certainly it would have been easier for me to have just figured out how to stay in school and graduate.
Right.
But I think if I hadn't hit something resembling rock bottom in high school, I would have hit it in college. And I'm a little bit glad it happened sooner rather than later. um, so yeah, it was a sort of devastating time. But ultimately, I ended up a more resilient person, I think, and um, I also came to understand the value of education.
Mm.
Like having not finished high school and then like trying to just get a retail job. It's wild the difference that one piece of paper can make in your life. And then when I started college, because when I left high school, college seemed like a never going to happen thing for
Mhm.
me. Um, I took it very seriously. I was there because I was going to learn. I was paying for that degree.
Right.
Um, my priority was like second to baseline survival was doing the best that I could in this program because it it was my future. I was there for a reason.
Okay.
It wasn't just the next step in life for me.
Mm.
Um, so yeah, I don't think I would change. I don't think I would change anything. I definitely didn't do things the easiest way possible. But I would be a radically different person if I hadn't had the experiences that I had. And I've sort of, grown into liking who I am, and I've grown out of the shame that comes with having fallen on my face just so hard.
Okay, right on. And then my last question before we close out is if there's anyone who was in a situation close to yours, like someone thinking about dropping out of high school or in the same boat as you as working as much as you did and trying to make it, what kind of advice would you give them?
I think the best advice that I got along my path, um, there were two things. The first piece of advice came from the uh, writer Scott Woods, who is he's the face of Columbus, Ohio. Um, I was freaking out about something, and he just said, "Just do you."
Mhm.
And at the time, I was just like, "Oh yeah, thanks." Like, very helpful, Scott. Like, I know exactly what that means. Um, but like, I think that being a little less insecure about the things that I'm interested in the path that I want to be on, um, it's made it a lot easier to just be myself and follow my interests and stay with what's important to me. Um, and that's like that was the number one piece of advice that I got that I think got me through the law school application process. In
Mm.
terms of just more general things, my thesis advisor and I were having a conversation about whether or not I should take gap years in between undergrad and uh, and graduate school, law school.
Mhm.
Um, and I was freaking out about the timing of everything, and like not wanting to be late, because like I already felt like I was running late because college had taken me longer and just like
Mhm.
all of this stuff. Um, and it sort of reached a point where she's like, timing is fake, it's arbitrary.
Mhm.
There's no such thing as a perfect path forward. And college isn't going anywhere, law school isn't going anywhere. um the the next thing, it can be whatever you want it to be. And I think sort of getting the clarity from him that life is, as long as it is short and you can choose to fill it with whatever you want, for the most part, within some kind of reason.
Mm.
um for me, it helped me feel like it didn't matter so much that I took a little bit of extra time through college. It made it actually valuable for me to take time in between the two things to gain some more experience, to maybe grow up a little bit more.
Mhm.
um yeah, I think yeah, just being myself and not being afraid to operate on my own timeline were the most important things for me.
Yeah, that's really great advice. Um, Something that kind of stood out to me about you is that you do know yourself very well, because being able, knowing your limits and being able to say, I can't do this, I need to withdraw, is a skill that I feel like you have to grow into. And for you to be able to notice that so early is pretty impressive.
Yeah, I do feel like, how did that happen? I, I think part of it was like largely it felt like I had no choice. Like I had particular goals. So for me, it was less about like knowing myself and more about knowing at least the general direction in which I was heading and what I need to do now to take the
Okay.
next step forward. So thinking about my my limits during my first year of college, where I took a bunch of W's, had no idea what I was doing, and needed to learn how to set some academic and professional boundaries for myself. um, I think that was largely, when I decided to take those W's, I was thinking about, I don't want to tank my GPA because I want to be able to transfer to a university, or like, I I was on the debate team, and I was just like, I want to stay eligible for the debate team. And just like thinking about the the goals that I had, and then doing what I had to do, even if like I felt embarrassed to have to withdraw from the class. Especially like, there's this one math teacher, I withdrew from two of his classes. Like my first semester I withdrew from one of his classes, and then the next summer I tried to take calculus with him and withdrew again. And like, that was just embarrassing. It's just like, this man probably thinks I cannot do math. I mean, like, yeah, that was years ago. He doesn't remember me. It's fine.
Yeah. I'm sure.
But, you know, it's feelings pass. But some choices are forever.
Yeah.
So thinking about how the choices I was making was going to influence my future, I think was the most important skill there.
Yeah. And that reminds me of the advice of like, well, like when you said choices don't last, like, will this affect me in 2 days, 2 weeks, 2 years, or 2 months, 2 years? I used to do that a lot in high school when I thought the world was ending and everything was just super dramatic for me. Um, so yeah, that's really good advice. Okay, well, thank you so much for allowing me to interview for this podcast. Your story is very inspiring, and I wish you all the luck at Yale Law School.
Oh, well, thank you so much. This was such a blast, and good luck on your application process. I'm sure you're going to crush it.
Thank you. Bye, guys.